we're not turned on, she says. Oh, yes, you are. Okay, before everybody gets involved in deep conversations, and I'm worried that some of you might discover the answers to the world's most pressing problems, and if we interrupt you to have a panel, we could be disturbing the solutions to the world's problems, so you better get on with the panel, I think. Anyway, it's never a joy when somebody phones up and says, we're going to give you the spot right after lunch, because we all know what happens in that spot. But then it was, well, you can talk about water. Okay, that makes it good. And you got three really great panelists. So this turned something into, instead of being a challenge, really a joy and a delight. So welcome, everybody. This is the panel on water in agriculture. We've had 2 days, really, of looking at the problem of how the world is going to feed itself at 9 billion population. And the focus has really been on crops, cereal crops, agricultural methods, a little bit of the sociology and of agriculture, not quite enough. But the myriad factors that go into this. But underneath it all is this assumption that there will be water there for the agricultural needs. And that is one of the things that obviously our panel is going to have to put a bit of a searchlight on, to say that as we approach 9 billion people, and as tastes change, we had a marvelous cast winner who said that over 50% of agricultural water really now goes into the animal chain for the feed and fodder, to food and fodder, to feed to the animals, and the water productivity, the water needed to produce and process and deliver livestock. I not checked that figure, but it certainly gives the idea how former ideas of what feeding the world was about, i.e. expanding the rice bowl, if more than 50% of some of the factors of production are going into the food, into the livestock part, the protein part of the food chain, things really have changed an enormous amount, and that adds hugely to the complexity of making sure that there's enough water. So we're going to need more land, we hope not. We've all discussed why that's not a good idea. More food, exponential growth to 9 billion. We have, and we've had them for the last few days, ideas, concepts, science, technology, best practice. Are we on the track to improvement? And we've been asked to look at the Castman thesis on whether we're really on the track to improvement. Ken Castman in his report talked about rates of grain and crop yields, food prices being on the rise, abrupt changes in land patterns, and increasing atmospheric greenhouse gases. And he said these are pretty good indicators that we're not very sustainably on track to reach our goal of sustainably feeding 9 billion people. Now, when you turn it to look at the water account, you look at different issues. Groundwater being depleted in a number of countries, and a number of major rivers not reaching the sea, and a number of very major lakes being threatened in both quantity and quality. We look at water pollution, hypoxic zones, even municipal reservoirs in this country being threatened by nutrient runoffs. You look at the competition between agriculture, energy, and industry, which I'm sure you're hitting as you go on expanding markets, because it is a very real and growing competition, and energy producers are big players in this, and they're powerful players, often certainly compared to smallholder agriculture. So the balance sheet that you look at, are we winning or losing, in water is a little bit different than when you're looking simply or uniquely at crop production. But luckily, we've got three really good, experienced, thoughtful men up here this morning, or this afternoon, to help us look at these questions. And my questions are, where are the good new ideas to make water go further, better, cleaner, more times per drop, and more crop per drop. Where are those great ideas? And is the world moving in these directions sufficiently so that we are on course to really trying to achieve what needs to be achieved if we really are going to sustainably feed 9.5 billion people? So it's not just a land and crops issue, it's very much a water availability issue. So, who are our three today? You've got your book, the book which very nicely puts us all together and gives you a bit of background and puts in pictures that make us all look very nice indeed. So you will be able to look at the longer version of who we are. Dan Bena, to my immediate left, heads Sustainable Development in Pepsi, and he looks particularly, but he has pretty broad knowledge, but he looks particularly at water safety, i.e. the pollution issue, and public health issues. Paul Bakus, further down, is Nestle Corporate Affairs, and he's got a long experience looking at nutrition, health and wellness issues, and he's now looking at the roundtable in obesity, which is, of course, the growing nutritional issue. And Dilip Kulkarni, to my immediate right, is the president of agro-foods within Jane, and anybody who doesn't know Jane is synonymous with really great new developments in irrigation. Everybody must know that. But he's also got an interest in food technology and in food processing. And as you're going to discover, that's part of the key to what it is we have to find out. So we're going to have more or less of a conversation with a few longer interventions, but we're not going to have set speeches because we have to keep you awake after that very nice soya lunch. So, okay, let's talk first of all, what really is the water in agriculture issue for the next 20 years? Dan, lead us off, and what big issue are we facing as we try and feed 9 billion people?
Thanks very much, Maggie. My mother was a big fan of the KISS principle. If you don't know that, it's keep it simple, stupid. And she would say that to me quite frequently. I'm not sure if I should be happy or sad about that. But in some ways, there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I think it comes down to too much water or in the wrong places, too little water, not enough quality. And certainly the not enough water. If we look out to the year 2050, 4.8 billion people, 45% or so of the global GDP, which would be $63 trillion, will be at some risk of water scarcity. If you look at the Water Resources Group, the 2030 Water Resources Group, they estimate a 40% gap between water supply and demand out to the year 2030. Certainly, a major portion of that gap can be filled through interventions in agriculture, since we all know the factoids about 70 to 90% of water use in agriculture globally. The good news is, Maggie, I think there has been a remarkable focus in the past 5 years on water scarcity. There's been new technology to better map water scarcity and predict water scarcity. Hasn't been a whole lot of focus on the other end of the spectrum, the flooding, the water overabundance. Admittedly, it may be a little bit more difficult to predict with any sort of long-term certainty, but that is something that I think is critical, because when you look at flooding events that happen quickly and that happen catastrophically, we all know all too well the impacts that that can have on agriculture and food insecurity. Not to mention pollution. I mean, you hinted at it. UN Water, in one of their infographics just a couple of years ago, pointed the finger very clearly at nitrate from agriculture, the most prevalent chemical contaminant in global groundwater. So obviously we're starting to see all of these bits and pieces that are forming a pretty compelling picture. I think what's needed is something that brings it all together.
Okay, Dilip, has he got it right? Has he got the major elements in there?
Very much. Actually, when the earth was created, the water was created. And we have still the same water. We don't have a single drop extra. But you know, there is a lot of exploitation, particularly groundwater exploitation. And 60% farmers are still deprived of water. There is a soil moisture insecurity. And from that point of view, I think reaching water to those fields which have not seen water, irrigation water, I think that is the solution for future food security. And this is possible because...
So if it's possible, why don't we do it?
Yeah, the efforts are required from the point of view of recharging the ground aquifer through rainwater harvesting and using whatever water is available very efficiently. Like what we say, more crop per drop.
India is probably the poster child of water scarcity, and yet, you know, India is full of very intelligent, dedicated people who know the water situation very well. Tell us a little bit about why it's so tough to make the kind of progress that you're talking about. What do you run up against, or what does a government run up against in India when they try and make the changes that are needed?
See, the recent government, which is there now in position, has announced that every farm will have water. Now, how is
That's helpful, but it doesn't...
Yeah, but how is going to happen?
Yeah.
And I think the solution lies in what I said, the water use efficiency. The soil moisture security is the most important parameter for the productivity of the crop. Right amount of water at right stages of the growth of the plant. And I think making it available as and when it is required is the key to the growth of the plant and productivity of the crop. So from that point of view, conserving water during monsoon period, particularly for India, because you know, if you see the number of rainy days, there are hardly 20 to 25 rainy days in a year during monsoon, actual rainy days. And whatever water is available during that time has to be conserved. In situ water conservation in the field itself, what we call it as green water, then increasing the blue water by storing it, on-farm storage. Like I was saying that there is more than 60% land which has not seen irrigation water till today. The possibility of developing farm ponds during monsoon season, give critical irrigation to the crop when it is needed. Just 3 to 4 critical irrigations during the growth of the crop, like during flowering, during fruit setting or pod setting or grain setting. There is productivity increase of almost 50 to 60% alone by water.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Paul, what have we missed in terms of the major factors that are part of the water for agriculture conundrum?
I think the panelists have done a nice job of framing the issue, and I think all of us, what keeps us up at night is the fact that we really do believe there's a serious issue. And you asked the question, why isn't there more action being done? And I think water and water scarcity needs to be higher on the agenda, particularly of the local governments. And everyone needs to recognize that this is a significant issue, and it really is going to threaten food security in much greater detail in the future. This issue isn't going to go away, and you can't wish it away. And there isn't a silver bullet. There's not a single solve. It's a multitude of constituents that need to come together to really address this issue at a local watershed level. You know, from our standpoint, we can manage our water more efficiently and effectively in our factories, but the reality is we rely on so much agricultural inputs, and we're very concerned that we're not going to have enough to keep our operations running if we don't address this water situation. So it's high on our radar screen, but it needs to be higher at the level around our facilities, around the growing areas that we source our commodities. And it starts with having the local governments really help to be a part of the solution and convene. And the good news is we've seen that it works. There are signs that we as a collective group can make a difference. And so I'm very encouraged by what we've seen as an industry and as a company if we get the right people together. But it starts by getting the awareness level up.
I want to come back to this at the very end, what we can all do to help governments try and set the better policy framework for this, because I think, and you're going to find out this afternoon, how much the private sector can do. Initiative and the innovative impact, but ultimately you run into the need for good public policy. So we're going to circle back and end there. But let's move on right now to food waste. The common saw, just as Dan says, 70% plus of the water that humans use goes into agriculture. And the other cliche is that we probably waste 40% of the food that is produced. It's a different 40%. In the global south, a lot of it gets lost between the stage of being in the field up to the point where it can be sold. In the global north, a lot of it starts at the point where it goes into your own refrigerator or into the refrigerator refrigerated units of the supermarket. So it is a different loss pattern. But, you know, I was going to say simple, but it's in fact simplistic mathematics. You know, if you could get away from, if you could remove the 40% waste from the 70% used, you'd have 30% more of water to use on agriculture, and we could make it to 9 billion very easily. Now, you can tell I did not major in advanced mathematics, but the point is that we would have a great deal more water. How are we doing on that one? Because food waste is intimately connected with the actual amount of water that's available for us to use. Have you got some good ideas up your sleeve about?
25 to 30% of the food never reaches consumer, particularly in developing countries. And this is mostly because of lack of infrastructure. The roads are not good, there are no cold storages, no cold chains available, particularly for perishable commodities like fruits, vegetables. And, you know, the grading, packing facilities and transportation is a big issue in most of the developing countries. And that causes most of the food waste. And the solution itself is in problem, what I have said, that we have to develop the infrastructure. And infrastructure, particularly cold storages, warehouses, I think these are very important. And particularly at farm level, the farmer has to be educated. Many a times the harvesting is not done at a proper stage. So if we do even simple harvesting and at proper stage at grading, we can prevent about 10 to 12% of the losses which can happen during transportation. There are new varieties which are coming, like say tomatoes. We have now new varieties which can withstand the rough road transportation, and they can stay for longer. So the solution also lies into, you know, the varieties which could be useful for long distance transportation. So there are several kinds of solutions available. But only thing is there has to be a program at the national level and implementation at the ground level.
Well, you're the president of something called Agriculture and Food Processing. So what is your company specifically doing? I mean, what's your product? Because you have to turn this into a product that has buyers and...
We work with complete value chain in agriculture, right from irrigation solutions like drip and sprinkler. We are also in greenhouses, tissue culture, and food processing. Actually, food processing started like this when we started giving these high-tech agri inputs to the farmers. The productivity enhances. And when there is a productivity enhances and there is lack of infrastructure, there is a problem of access to market by the farmers. And in order to help farmers, actually we started processing buyback, you know, from the farmers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and particularly mango, bananas, and, you know, guavas, papayas, and tomatoes, and onions. So we did a lot of contract farming. We buy from the farmers who buy our inputs as a buyback, you know. We settle their advances against the raw material which we purchase from them. And we process fruits and vegetables for pulps, for concentrates, dehydrated onions, and a lot of waste is generated during the processing. In case of fruits particularly, almost 50% waste is generated in the form of peels and seeds and, you know, roughages which comes out after extraction of juices. And what we have done with that is, we recycle that, we convert it into methane and produce electricity. Like we have 300,000 tons of fruits and vegetable processing in our company, and we generate almost 150,000 tons of waste. And all that is converted to methane gas and we produce electricity. We produce something like 1.76 megawatt electricity from that and use it in the company. So it's and also that processing generates a bio-waste, which is a very good fertilizer.
Good slurry, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a complete recycling of the food material. Yeah.
And it does save water.
Yeah, it saves water because it's recycled into the system.
Very good. Yeah, I'm going to go with Paul first because he wants to talk about supply chains. So
Getting our arms around waste has multiple benefits, but one that's really not so visible is all the water that's consumed with this waste. And I'll give you one example that may be a little bit non-traditional, but Nestle sources a significant amount of milk across the globe, and we've set up milk markets or districts to source milk from farmers. And what we've seen is that in these markets where we source milk, without any intervention, there's anywhere from 16 to 30% waste of the milk. And so what we do is we bring in infrastructure that, first of all, we accept all milk that the farmers want to sell us. And so there's no waste from that farmer. They can have a place to bring and sell their milk. But then it talks about the infrastructure, about how we cool the milk, how we put it on refrigerated trucks, how you get it to market. And what we've seen is when you have the infrastructure in place, and keep in mind this isn't just Nestle doing this, it's working in partnership with the local communities because everyone will benefit from this. We've seen a significant reduction in the waste, under 1%. So if you think about...
You've got waste down to 1%?
Down to 1%, from roughly 20% to 1%.
That's a lot.
So you think about the immediate increase in capacity, milk, but then also you're making that much more milk or having that much more milk come to market with the same amount of water. So this is just another way of thinking about water usage in the whole agricultural supply chain. If we can eliminate this waste, you can really produce a lot more with the same amount of water.
That's good. Excellent. Dan, you know one or two things about supply chains, too.
I wanted to offer a point of calibration for this waste, and your math is actually pretty good.
Oh,
Maggie.
really?
Because there was a study by the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, I think it was just last year, that suggests an estimate of 1 quadrillion liters every year of water wasted in food waste. 1 quadrillion.
How many zeros is that?
15 zeros.
15 zeros.
I mean, that's unbelievable, and that's every year. So you think about the magnitude if even a portion of that is able to be saved. And the one thing I wanted to bring us back to was the Castman report, because one of the focus areas in that, as I read it, was the importance of people and the importance of leveraging people and capability. And one very, very small, but I think innovative solution is PepsiCo has decided to work with the World Food Program, I think 5 years or so ago. And we figured, if PepsiCo or if Nestle or if any of these consumer products companies have enough consumers that want our products anywhere in the world, we figure out a way to get it to them, right? We call that the final mile. If we can leverage that same final mile capability for food waste, for warehousing, for logistics and distribution. So we're using our retirees that were in global operations, working with the World Food Program to design better distribution systems. And it's been a partnership made in heaven. It's been really, really very positive.
You have also, I've been very few places in the world where there isn't Frito-Lays hanging up in the corner of the little roadside stand or whatever. And if you want a good cocktail party question, ask somebody who the largest potato buyer is in the whole world, and people will say McDonald's, McCain's, things like that. It's Pepsi. And you've also done some things about water use in the production, in the growing, in the agricultural use. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There's a couple of things that I think are notable. One is kind of on the community side of things. So it's one in agriculture, which actually does not feed our supply chain. And that was in India. You mentioned the poster child, unfortunately, but it is the production of low-cost tensiometers. So in India, you can get a tensiometer probe that tells you when to water your crops for about $150 US. It's a lot of money when you consider the annual income's about $400 or $500 US. So we worked with the Columbia Institute, the Columbia Water Center at the Earth Institute, and got the fabrication costs of those tensiometers down to about $7 US. Over 5,000 farmers are now using those tensiometers, and they're saving between 20 and 30% of the water over traditional flood irrigation. That's one. The other one, not so inexpensive, but equally as effective. It's something that we did in partnership, and again, partnerships are key over and over again with this, finding solutions. It was with the University of Cambridge in the UK, where we developed something called iCrop. And it uses a bunch of different climatic sensors on farm. It takes readings about every 15 minutes or so, and it uses a software. But it tells us exactly when to water the crop, and it delivers the water to the root zones of those crops. There again, we're seeing 20 to 30% reduction.
About getting it to getting the amount that you need, no less, no more, to the crop. So you're doing. You're each in the private sector. You're competitive. You have to be competitive. There are a couple of other beverage companies running around, I hear. We want your really good solutions to grow. We want them to spread. We want them to move beyond the boundaries of your very large companies. How Talk a little bit about that, because you do very innovative solutions. Like, I know the tensiometers you don't want to keep within the Pepsi family. You want that to grow. But how do you reconcile this in the sense of becoming advocates, missionaries for an improved approach to water, with the fact that this is one of the things that puts you into a competitive position? Paul, do you want to...
It's clear you can't create competitive advantage around this area. You know, a sustainable source of supply of raw materials is something that has to be looked at as, you're not going to get competitive advantage in that. You really need to be partnering with your competitors and others to be able to quickly come to the solution. So I appreciate the tensiometer approach. You know, how can we take that learning and build it into some of the things that we're using or implementing that aren't relying on technology? They're just basically relying on education and best practices. Because what we find is the farmers aren't doing anything knowingly wrong. It's they just don't know that they're overwatering. They don't realize that they're not using good water practices on their farm, and there's so much water that actually gets wasted on their farm, and they just don't know it. So how do we build off of one another's knowledge, and how can we leverage the tools and build these tools so that they can be additive and it's not exclusive? The solution's not going to be one simple solution. It's going to be multiple solutions. So it's a whole new world. You have to be collaborative. You can't expect competitive advantage in this area, because we'll all benefit if we crack this code.
Do you go out and advocate for, I mean, when I said India was a poster child, it's also got really good examples. It's got the good, the bad, and everything. But does Jane spend good time trying to become advocates for better water practice?
Actually, we are the second largest employer of extension workers after government.
Really?
Yeah, more than 1,000 they call agriculture helpers. And, you know, extension is the key. And from that point, I will just give an example. Like in Maharashtra state, 60% of the available water is used by 3% of crop, that is sugarcane, which is a criminal waste.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes. You'd have to go to Florida.
Yeah, and if you use drip irrigation in sugarcane, you can save almost 50 to 60% water. And there is increase in productivity by 30 to 40%. There is a club of farmers who have formed, they call it 100 tons farmers club. Those farmers who produce more than 100 tons per acre, they have formed a club, and all of them use, water-saving devices. This is one example. Like in onion dehydration, what we buy a lot of onion from farmers, and if the flood irrigation is used, the water requirement is something like 443 liters per kg of onion produce. Whereas if we use drip irrigation, it requires only 228 liters of water to produce 1 kg. But when we sell dehydrated onions world over, most of international buyers, they buy from us, but nobody pays premium for the onion which has a small water footprint. We have done water footprinting of all our products, but there is no premium in the market. There has to be some concept, buying premium for the produce which has used water-saving devices.
We're circling back again to the role, the necessary public role. Yeah. Yes. Do. Yes.
One very specific example, and it was an interesting lesson when we started to talk about pre-competitive topics, and water is certainly one of them. And in all candor, I mean, when we go to our frontline salespeople and we tell them that we're working with our competitors and we're working with Nestle and we're working with Coca-Cola, they look at us sort of out of the corner of their eyes and wonder, where does our loyalty lie? Because that's frontline, that's sales, that's very different. Water, a great example of pre-competitive. The chair of Nestle, the chair of PepsiCo, the chair of Coca-Cola, all serve together on the governing council of something called the 2030 Water Resources Group. And that is specifically formed to engage with governments at their request to help collectively close that 40% gap that I started off my comments with. What's really cool about 2030 WRG is transparency. So we issued a compendium of good practices. We never want to say best practices, at least good practices. The tensiometer is one of them that's in that compendium. It's all available in the public domain, and the idea is to keep making that compendium richer and richer and grow more and more.
Want to add anything, Paul?
I think that's a great point, and it speaks to the fact that we're all in this together, and we're all going to benefit from a solution, regardless of what the situation of the crop is, and it's going to take a village to tackle this problem, and you just have to be open to working in new and different ways with a variety of stakeholders, including your competitors.
Good enough. Well, I want to get to public policy, but I want to give you each, I want to make sure that we've really talked about some of the things that your companies are doing. So I give you a chance to say, is there anything you want to add about what your company is doing? Tell us a little bit about what drip irrigation does in terms of water saving. And
yeah, see, drip irrigation or whether it is sprinkler irrigation, we can save almost 50 to 60% water. And there is crop productivity increase by almost 30 to 300% in some of the crops. Yes, in some of the crops. And, it's not just only water saving. It is the productivity increase which is very important. We also save on fertilizer. Almost 30% fertilizers are saved.
good.
Yeah, and also we can save on the labor costs. The weeds are less. Recently, we have standardized methodology for drip irrigation in paddy, which is, you can't imagine that paddy without a water field, And on this 30th of October, we are launching this big program at Bangkok International Rice Conference, where we have seen that almost 55% water saving by drip irrigation in paddy, which is unimaginable.
Yes.
And it's not only that, there is also prevention of greenhouse gases in paddy,
yes,
because we don't have stagnated water there. Our company did a program which we do every year on 1st of May. We identify 1,000 villages. There are wells which are dried up, which have no water during summer. We do recharging of well program on 1st of May. The physical infrastructure which is required for recharging is done on 1st of May on that day. All the villagers, they come together, bring their own bullock carts, their equipments which are required for excavation and building up, and they do at least 10 wells in a village as a joint community program, developing recharging of wells. This type of mass movement is required. And I think this will be very revolutionary if we do that rainwater harvesting, recharge aquifer, accumulate water in farm ponds, use it, achieve soil moisture security. And I think that will cause a lot of impact on food security issues in future.
I hope so. Yeah. I do. What haven't we touched on that you are proud of that?
There's one thing in particular that's actually very recent. It's something we announced at the World Water Week in Stockholm just last month or so. PepsiCo Foundation obviously played a very small role in something this potentially big, but I urge every one of you to Google Hydrobid, Hydrobid, because it is a brand new tool, a suite of tools that the Inter-American Development Bank has developed and are piloting, which will give you as close to real-time insight into being able to do a water budget as any tool that I think is out there. We have a lot of expectations for this tool. It's being piloted in 5 countries now. It's completely open sourced. It's in the public domain. It's only going to get better if more and more people use it and build on it, but we think it can be a global tool.
It can, and I mean, the whole big data thing is enormous, is going to change water, because it often comes as a surprise to people in North America that water quantity is a closely guarded secret in many countries. And there's even the amount of river flow from one country to the other is very, very closely guarded secret. And so therefore it becomes extremely difficult to do any kind of reasonable transboundary work. I sit on the ECMOD board, which has the 7 countries of the Hindu Kush and the Kailash group, and even trying to do flood prevention and flood protection is very difficult because you simply cannot get the flow data that you need. So if we start combining all of the publicly available data on water flow, water quantity, water quality, and turning that, using the skills of big data, we can actually start getting much better ideas, as well as to be used at the macro as well as at the micro level. I mean, again, at the micro level, one of the very real ways to make sure that we don't have municipal which isn't our subject today, but municipal problems, is water metering. The whole island of Malta is completely metered, and the meters measure electricity use, water, unforeseen water rises, unforeseen water drops, so that you've got immediate electronic forecasting of flooding, shortage, too much electricity, and leakage. So, you know, a lot of the very good new possibilities really do come through using 21st century technology. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it links into a lot of really good things. Okay, let's circle back and talk about public policy. And, you know, it's very clear that each of your three companies takes their citizen, you know, as international citizens very seriously to do the right thing about water. It's very difficult to try and get governments to do the right thing about water. And people often say to me, okay, you've been working in this field for a long time. I see my friend Mark over there smiling. Why is it so difficult to get positive and good change about water policy? And I say, well, just imagine you're the water minister and somebody comes up and says, we really need a new water plan because there's people over here that don't have enough and there's people here that have too much. So the first thing you've got to do, Madam Minister, is to take the water away from those folk over there and to give it to others over here. She's going to look at you and say, I would like to get elected again at some point. And so then you say, well, then we'd like to meter it and monitor it. And then you'll find out that that has tremendous obstacles and very real problem areas for governments. And then you say, well, and then we really need $60 trillion worth of new water infrastructure. And by the way, none of it will show. Nobody will be able to see it, and so therefore you're simply taking the money and burying it under the ground. So, you know, by this time the water minister is convinced that this is a losing game in terms of trying to do the right thing in water, and yet maintain some kind of political popularity. I had an Indian friend who used to run for parliament, and he said it was very easy. He just waited until one of his opponents said something about a possible need for water price increases sometime in the future, and then he would quote it and put it in big posters, and he'd get elected, and the other one wouldn't. So, okay, how are we going to get out of what is really a difficult situation when you combine the democratic process and the need to do good things about water? Who wants to start on that? You? Good.
See, up till now, most of the governments, they describe water as a social good.
Yes.
And never as an economic good. I think the problem lies there. And, you know, it cannot be solved by sociological or democratic way. The solution lies in technology. That is what I feel. Like saving water. I think that is the key. Now, if you see the cases of large dams, distribution of water through open canal systems, reaching that water to the field, what is the water use efficiency there? Hardly 25%. Most of the water is evaporated, leached out, okay, stolen many times. And if you see actual water use for the crop is hardly 25% water use efficiency. But if you have in situ water conservation, small dams, check dams, farm ponds, recharging wells, you don't have that problem of water distribution. The water will be available at the sites. So what you are doing presently is you are collecting water from different places, bringing at one place and again redistributing. I think that is economically not good thing to do. So even if you have that, have piped distribution of water, piped, which is now being done in Brazil and some of the places where irrigation is not done by open channel. is done by piped distribution. And simply by converting open channel system and conveying water by pipes and using drip irrigation system, you can have water efficiency of something like 85%.
So you're saying make it easy for government.
Make
put
it
in
easy,
technology
yeah, and
that,
then it becomes, and also there are agronomic solutions. Agronomic solutions, I will give you just two small examples. Like say banana, it requires a lot of water. But if you have a technology of using tissue culture, you can have 3 crops in 2.5 years with increased productivity against traditionally 3 crops in 2 years. Two crops in 3 years. So which is, agronomic solution. You have increased productivity of 2 to 3 times. Or like we are now recently launched a program with Coca-Cola in South India for ultra high density mango plantation. Okay. Now here, against 40 trees per acre, traditionally we are planting something like 650 trees per acre. They are pruned, they are kept dwarf, the productivity increases 3 to 4 times. And this is a very successful program. We are targeting 50,000 farmers in next 5 years with a productivity increase of 4 times.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Put your faith
So it's
in,
an agronomic
put
solution.
your faith in technology, not in governments. Paul, your company has been a pioneer in trying to actually engage in government dialogues and in promoting the idea that particularly large companies, whether national or international, on the ground should be engaged in dialogues with governments to talk about what the water agenda is, what the water problems are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what was said earlier. You've got to talk about water in terms of economics. If you talk to the government about jobs, how many jobs are at stake? If we can't have access to water in our factory, it means X number of employees are going to not come to work because we can't run our factories without water. But it's much broader than that because, again, the commodities that we source and bring into our factories are so dependent upon water. If we don't have the water to grow the crops, we're not going to have the ability to keep these factories running. And so it comes back to what I said earlier, which is the local watershed is key. And the government has to be engaged. We have to talk about the entire use of water. Now, how do we treat our water after we use it in our facilities? How can we treat it in a better way, in a different way, so it can get repurposed? There are many different sectors that can play a part of the solution, and it really comes down to the government's got to be the convening agent, but they've got to do this with the right motivation, which is, we've got to look at the economics of this. And once you get them to look at the economics, it changes the whole dialogue. And I think it opens up their mind to be able and willing to talk to a much larger group of constituents.
So improved methods. I mean, you're both saying hold out a carrot and say to the government that, follow the carrot to maybe avoid having to use the stick. So
I think there's a place for a little bit of a stick too.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, so valuation is absolutely key, and valuation is not synonymous with price and cost, which too many people do kind of think of as the same. And if you truly value water, it gets back to what Paul started with, which was awareness raising. If we can get the general populace to actually value water conceptually, then they'll understand the pricing and costs that go along with it. If you want to get an elected official to act, what do? You have their constituents tell them that something's important. PepsiCo has about 1 billion consumer engagement opportunities every single day through our brands. If we're able to start leveraging that kind of engagement with messaging and with awareness building, and then imagine if Nestle does it with their billions.
imagine what you could do.
Exactly.
Well, we have a whole 1 minute and 50 seconds left, so we shouldn't feel under any time constraint. But let me end with Ken Castman's question. Are we on track? Is the water lined up to be supporting the agricultural sector so we really can feed 9.5 billion people? Are we on track, Paul?
We're making progress, but I am still not sleeping well at night knowing that the water scarcity issue isn't going away, and the climate changes are showing that it's potentially going to get worse. So we're making good progress, but we need to accelerate as a group our efforts at using water more efficiently and effectively.
So I hear you saying not quite. Dan?
I would agree with Paul. I am much more optimistic, specifically in the water context, than I am with the broader food and security context. I will say, though, Maggie, you absolutely need a systems holistic approach. The worst thing is to disincentivize a user for saving 40% of water, only to have rates increased by 40% the next year.
Yeah.
So that brings so many different stakeholders into the mix.
I mean, we have to invite the finance minister in, and he has
Absolutely.
to answer the invitation. Are we on track?
Partly I can say I agree with these two gentlemen, but every stakeholder has to play a role here. And I think private sector also can be change agents. And I think we are playing that role, at least recently, if not in the past. But collaborations and partnerships are very important. I think public-private partnership, NGOs, they should come together and implement this program for the good cause. I think we have to forget about what has happened in the past, but have a right path. Solutions are available. Only thing is there has to be willpower to implement.
Well, we finished right at the 000 mark. I think our report card to global civilization is maybe we're verging towards being on track, but not quite. That there are change agents around. A great number of them are in the private sector, and I want you to join in thanking our 3 private sector representatives today, who I think have done a superb job. So.